I'm going to introduce our two speakers. I'm going to start with Katherine Pickett. Katherine, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. First, thanks to everybody for coming out tonight. Really happy to see you guys, or this afternoon, wherever you are. Um, I'm Katherine Pickett. I'm the owner of Pop Editorial Services and the author of Perfect Bound: How to Navigate the Book Publishing Process Like a Pro. I've been an editor for over 25 years, working on nonfiction and fiction books, and um, I have been working on fiction over the last 3 years, writing it myself, and recently published my first novel, Deborah Lee Won't Break. So that's me.
And Katherine, can you remind us where you're based out of?
Sure, I'm in Silver Spring, Maryland, just north of the district. It's exciting
Excellent.
times.
Tanisha, welcome.
Hey, glad to be here. Thank you for inviting me. Um, for those of you who don't know, my name is Tenesha L. Curtis. I also write fiction and nonfiction. Most of my nonfiction is just geared towards helping new authors establish themselves and kind of navigate the publishing world as far as just writing and developing and completing a book. I run getbookhelp.com, which is one of like 8 websites that I have. And that's just where I do my editorial services thing, but I put my author link in the chat if anybody is interested in seeing that stuff. But it has links to wherever I am on the internet. And so my last nonfiction publication was Intro to Indie Publishing. And that was, I think, came right before my latest, which was a romantic novella called The Christmas Proof. So I'm kind of all over the place with my writing. I love reading in different genres. So I'm always writing in different genres. I help people edit in different genres. So I just love books, like full stop. It's pretty much how that
And
works.
then remind me, you're also the president of the Atlanta chapter of Sisters in
Oh,
Crime?
yes, exactly. Sisters in Crime is a international, actually, organization for people who either write or are just lovers of crime fiction, so mysteries, thrillers, things like that. And I got elected president for this year, and I just got reelected, so I'll be doing it again next year. So that's been a blast for sure.
Lovely. I love that. I love that. So, target audience and why that matters. And how many times have we all read a book and we were like this isn't what I thought it was going to be? And that's when sometimes it registers to me like two things are happening. Either I picked up the wrong book or the book promised something that it didn't deliver on. And more likely than not, I was not the target audience for that book. Or if I was the target audience, the writer didn't know how to reach me. And that sometimes there's so many components, I think, to establishing the target audience, because once you establish who your reader is, who that ideal reader is, so many decisions you make going forward are going to come back to who that target reader is. Not only from word choice to sentence length to paragraph length to all the big decisions you're going to make in terms of book design, book cover design, marketing in the future. So it really this knowing who your target reader is not just one thing that you do today and forget about it. It is going to inform all the other decisions you make about your book in the future as well and your other books. So I guess my first question, and I mentioned this before when we were kind of getting warmed up, I always think about the target audience as the chicken and the egg thing. Which comes first? Do I write the book that I want to write, or do I write the book that my audience wants to read? And if I've already started writing the book, oh, what do I do? How do I know? Do I stop and then go all the way back, or do I just keep going? So there's not one perfect way of doing this, and I think what you're going to see tonight is that we all approach the subject differently. But I'm going to start asking Katherine, because Katherine, when you wrote, can you show us the cover of Perfect Bound, by the way? So if you're a writer and you don't have this book, you've heard me recommend it thousands of times. Can you tell us what Perfect Bound is about for those that don't know?
Sure. Perfect Bound is a book that takes you through the whole book publishing process from manuscript to final product, ebook or print book, or however you want to get that book out into the world. Um, and it shows you side by side traditional publishing versus self-publishing so that you can decide which path is going to be right for you. And for this book, actually, it's really interesting. I think I had done the most research of as far as target audience with this one because it really came out of workshops that I had been doing with authors who I had met through the St. Louis Publishers Association when I lived in St. Louis. And they would have so many questions about what to expect. How were they going to get their book made? And they, of course, had no idea what went into making a book because if you don't work in the industry, you're not likely to really know all of the steps that go into creating a book. So I had done several workshops, 3 hour long workshops, weekend workshops with people, and heard their questions and heard what their pain points were and then used all of that. It was like, what I really need to do is write a book because I can do a workshop with, 3 people or 10 people, but I could do a book and, share it with a lot more people, a lot more efficiently. So then I was able to include all of that in the book and really make sure that I was addressing the people who needed the information.
Right. So that's awesome because I had a very similar journey to yours, Catherine. And I think Tanisha, let's go to you. How did you have several books that I have based a lot of workshops and classes on. And I just love recommending as well because they are so practical. They're very straight to the point. They solve a problem, they tell you how to do it, or you give everybody a path or a simple idea of how to do it and without overcomplicating things. How did you come about writing some of the I would say some of the craft, I don't know if they're craft books or more like technical writing books that you've created.
I mean, why can't it be both, right? Like I don't know. But similar to, what Catherine went through, where it was just like, as I'm working with these authors and getting the same exact questions over and over and over again, I just thought, okay, well, I could just put this in a book. Then that way I could just email it to people, hand it out. You know what I mean? And then because I was the type of person that even though I'm an author at this whatever event, I would sit there talking to you about how you can, publish your book for 45 minutes instead instead of selling the books that I'm supposed to be there to sell. So again, even for me, it was more of a practical thing for me to be able to be like, okay, listen, I got this book. I can send you a copy. You know what I mean? And then you can just look through it. But like you said, Linda, I didn't want it to be some big slog to get through all the content. I wanted it to be just very straightforward, easy to read. They're all really small, really short. So that the idea being that you get a concentrated idea of like what you need, and then you can just move on to the next step quickly. Um, you don't need like an MFA to figure out how to do this. Like it's pretty straightforward, especially with the technology that we have available today. So for me, it was also more of a like, okay, instead of me doing this like person by person, let me have something that's just kind of ready made that I can hand out to folks.
Awesome. I'm going to put a link to one of the books, and Catherine, I'll link to your book as well in a second. And yes, my journey was kind of the same. I didn't set out to write a book. I was running the welcome program for the Editorial Freelancers Association. I was meeting a lot of editors. I also could see that the concerns overlapped and that editors had the same concerns other editors had in other parts of the country or other parts of the world. And as afraid of being so repetitive or sounding repetitive, I also thought if I could put all this information about what's the best way to network if you're an editor and how to gain more business, it'll just be much easier if it was in a book format. And it was very easy to write. And I knew exactly who I was writing for because I had been working with this group of people specifically.
Mm.
Um, when that book kind of did its own thing and took off, and I started going to writing conferences or to conferences that had editors and writers and meeting other writers, because now I was an author, I realized that writers and authors have the same problem is that how can you network more effectively? What do you do if you're a shy writer? How do you get out there? How do you promote your book? And so that's when my second book, Networking for Writers, came about because I was noticing I was now moving in that circle of writers and listening to what people were having trouble with or were complaining about or needed help with. And so how could I try, like Catherine said, or Tanisha, how do I address those pain points and offer maybe tangible solutions in everyday life that you could work with? So in both cases, they came easy. Now, the three of us are talking about what we've written and can we talk about a little bit about, and then we're going to get into the specifics, but Catherine, like you, after writing Perfect Bound, you decided to write a fiction book. And that was a whole other ball game and a whole other audience. So How did that experience of your first book inform writing for a target audience for your second book?
Yeah, so they really are very, very different. The marketing's different, the writing process is different. So you started by asking about the chicken or the egg, and I think it's very clear for me, when I write nonfiction, I'm definitely trying to write like with my audience in mind from the very beginning, absolutely, because that's the purpose of what I'm doing. With fiction, there's more of it that, at least initially, it's for me because it's something that I care about and something that I enjoy, and it's a story that I find entertaining and I want to share, and I want to figure out how to craft it really well, and it becomes a puzzle. So there's the part of the writing that's personal, creative, and mine. And then I'm more like, okay, so now what do I know about the people who read these kinds of books? And of course, along the way, I'm reading other books like mine and trying to make sure that I am doing things one the way the reader expects, but then also taking my own twist on what is expected, so that it can be interesting and comfortable for the reader. Um, and I, with this book in particular, Deborah Lee Won't Break, the audience was I felt like I had two audiences. One, people who live with MS or who that multiple sclerosis, or know someone who does, because my main character has multiple sclerosis. And then the whole world of people who have never been touched by multiple sclerosis and won't know anything about it. So I was balancing that and trying to figure out, I wanted the story to be enjoyable for both groups. And I'm actually really happy with the way it turned out, because the feedback I've gotten from people, the different groups have different, like there's a little bit of a medical mystery in the story, and the different groups have different approaches, and they're like, oh, I thought it was this, I thought it was that. And so depending on your personal background, you'll come to the story and experience it differently. So I feel like I was successful in making it entertaining for people with some familiarity of MS and people who don't have that familiarity.
So, so takeaway from this is that you can write for two different audiences with your book. And another kind of case in point was the whole Harry Potter series. I just remember that was a series that was written for young adults. And who was actually buying and reading the books? It was all the moms and everybody in their 30s and 40s. And, that's what drove that whole series, besides the children. So just because you write for one audience doesn't mean that you can't write for two audiences or a secondary audience, what's usually called. And also, it doesn't mean that other people are just not going to pick up the book and discover it. So that happens. Um, and it's organic. However, you always need to know who you're writing, who your primary audience or secondary audience is first, before you start assuming that you're going to reach all these other people instead. And Tanisha, with your Christmas, it's a Christmas romance novel, right? The one that you wrote?
It
No?
takes place during the holidays. I don't know how to say
Oh,
Christmas romance. That was actually
okay.
one of my beta readers like feedback. She was like, I'm so glad you didn't hit the holiday part so hard. I was like, thanks.
Great, great. So how did you, when you wrote that book, what was your approach to finding your audience or writing for your audience?
Well, I don't usually, it's not so much, I'm going to, kind of like Katherine said, I'm going to write what I want to write. And the whole audience part is more about like sales and stuff like that. Just, okay, who am I going to push this to? Who might actually be interested in what I have created? Um, so that is usually how that works for my fiction.
Hmm.
But, and even with the nonfiction, it's more, here's what I wish I had as a resource when I was at that stage, even though I'm not there anymore. If I had had that, I would like took over the world. If I had, this book at that
Definitely.
early of a point in my career. And so it's still very much more of a like, here's what I would like to have had. This is the romance novella that I would like to see on the shelf. You know what I mean? And then it's about me connecting with other people who like the same kind of stuff, right? And then on the nonfiction side, it's just okay, me connecting with people who are where I was. And again, I do that every day through my work with these authors. So it kind
Mhm.
of works out that way for me pretty much.
Perfect. So I like it. So your approach is also like, this is what I want to write.
Mm.
And then I will sell it. I'll curate more the sales part of the marketing part, depending on who I think is going to be reading this book. So it's more of, yeah, is it the chicken or the egg kind of thing again.
Right.
So, but I love it because it's true. There's not one perfect approach. So all approaches are valid. One of the things that I see a lot in craft writing books, especially nowadays, is you must have an avatar. Who's your target reader? What does that person look like? And there's like interview your reader, who are they going to be? And I usually, and I've worked with some of you here that are on this call, I really like at the beginning when I'm working with an author to really drill down, describe to me exactly, if you had to pick one person who's going to read this book, what do they look like? Where do they shop at? What do they do?
Mm.
Just because I want to get in the habit for the writer to be picturing that person in mind or that person's interest when they're writing the book so that they keep the language, again, the language, the sentence length, the words, that they're using, the tone, all of those things that will meet the reader. But when you, Catherine, when you wrote Deborah Lee or Perfect Bound, did you literally have like a piece of paper or, I don't know, a document where you were writing down, this is my target audience, this is, all the things that they like doing or, other books that they read, or were you not that specific?
So with Perfect Bound, I did put together a kind of proposal for the book, even though I was going to self-publish it because I was creating a publishing company and involving my husband. So I wanted to take it pretty seriously. And in that document, I had sketched out some ideas about who the audience was and where they shop and how I would reach them, trying to see. For me, it was a business decision to publish that book. It's something to support my company, and I wanted it to make sure that I was really considering all the facets. Was it going to be worth the money that I was going to put in, and time and everything like that. So for that book, I did have kind of a sketch of who I thought my audience was. With um, with Deborah Lee, I didn't write it down. I just thought of it, tried to think it through and think about who was I writing for? Where did I see the book being shelved? What other books were out there that were like it? I absolutely did competition research, which I think is closely related to audience. Like, what are the other books that my readers are going to be reading? So that I could have a well-rounded understanding of what they were expecting from the book. Um, in a way, I did exactly what I tell my readers, my clients not to do, which is like, I would say, you should write in the genre that you read and all of that stuff. And I do, this is what I would call this book club fiction, my book, or women's fiction. And I do read some of that, but I read a lot more other things. This was just somehow a story that I really wanted to get out. And so that that ended up being more of a guide. Um, but it does ring true with you with what you said of picturing that person. One thing that I've said is like try to imagine reading your book out loud and who's going to be on the other side? Who's going to be enjoy listening to that story? What does that person look like and where do they shop and what did they do? So I did try to do that, even if I wasn't as disciplined with like actually putting together a proposal and all of that for this particular book.
Right. I love that. Um, Tanisha, what about for you?
I was just gonna say that made me think of an analogy I've used quite a few times with clients where when we get to that stage, I say, okay, imagine that there is a magical marketer. Okay, this person can guarantee you to get 100 of the same type of person in the room. How are you going to sell 100 copies of your book in that room? Who do you want them to get 100 of? And so when you think of it like that, it's like, oh, okay, really trying to help them kind of again think about it. You've done your part, you've written the book you wanted to write, right? So now think about, all right, so what about this would appeal to large demographics of other people and in what ways? And so that's kind of how I look at it when I get to the point where I'm ready to launch and everything. It's like, all right, so who is going to care? Like, who is going to find this entertaining or educational, whatever it is I'm trying to do with that particular project. So I think
Mm.
that makes a lot of sense, even though again it's not, I feel like in my 5 P's of premise prep, when we talk about person, especially for nonfiction, that is exactly what's happening. I'm saying, okay, describe your person, meaning who are you writing this for? What is the purpose of this? What is this going to do for them? And I think in that it's kind of covered. In the promise section for fiction is really when you start talking, I start thinking about that little spark of like, okay, how are you going to package this story, and why do you want to package it that way? Is this, what genre is it? Of course, is a big thing, but then it's also like, is it a psychological thriller? Is it something more domestic? Is it, a murder mystery? Is it cozy? Like those different facets. How are you going to package this story and kind of try to deliver it to other people? So I do think just having people go through those steps in the beginning can be really helpful, to start thinking about the audience. Because what I don't want, and I've seen it happen before, what I try to avoid is I don't want especially a first time author, to be so wrapped up in what other people are going to think that they can't get their ideas out and just write the book, right? So it's like, it's okay to have it in mind, but don't let it like halt your progress because you're so obsessed, like it's just like, no, no, no,
Totally.
yeah, get it out. We can worry about that later. So I do try to, kind of find that balance. I don't want it to be something they're hyper fixated on, but if you want to consider it along the way, cool. Then that way, when we get closer to launch day, we can be a little more
Tailor it.
intentional. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. One of the things, and for those of you that are writers here, so the three of us are editors, and one of the huge red flags that sometimes happens when we're about to take on a new client and we start asking questions about your project is we will ask who your target audience is. And many, many times I'll get an answer like, oh, it's everyone. What do you mean, everyone? Everyone that loves romance. And it's like, well, okay, are we talking like Sweet Valley Girls? Is that one of them? Or are we talking about, 50 Shades of Grey? Like, what romance is a very big spectrum. Is it children? Is it YA? Is it, mom lit? Is it, chick lit? Is it, so the more you know, and again, like Tanisha said, it doesn't have to be perfect, but you have to have an idea in mind of who you're writing for, because then when you start working with an editor, that's the first thing they're going to ask you, because the editor will edit your book based on who you're telling them you're writing for or who your target audience is. They are going to do a really thorough check of your manuscript to make sure that all the things that need to be in place for this audience are in place in the manuscript. After you move on from editing, your book designer should be asking you who your target audience is, because based on that is how we're going to design that book cover. Where do they shop at? What kind of books do they pick up? How long are the pairs? So everybody along the way that you're going to interact with in your book publishing journey, regardless if you go traditional or if you go, I think, self, is going to ask you who these people are. If you want to be, your book comes out, you want to get booked on a podcast, the podcast host that you're trying to get on is going to ask you, who's your target audience, who's the book for. So again, it's really, the more you know about the person that you're writing to, and that person, by the way, can be you, because as you were talking to Nisha, I was thinking the books that I write are kind of sometimes for the Linda of 5 years ago that didn't know these things. And
Mm-hmm.
so I always feel like I'm writing to my past self with advice on what you should be doing better or could be doing better, where I was 5 years ago. So for me, many times, that's who I'm writing for in the first stage. And then as I start to get closer to the different levels of editing, I'll start fine tuning specifically more certain things. So, Catherine, so most of us write in Microsoft Word, I think. I know that some people write in Google Docs, but when you're working in Word, are there any settings that you use that correspond, and I know a lot of writers don't know this, to your target audience? Like, I know, go ahead, I'll let you answer and then.
Yeah, so I actually compose in Scrivener mostly now. I really love Scrivener. It I At this point I'm like, I don't know how I ever wrote a book in Microsoft Word, but it does eventually go into Word. And I used it especially, so this book here, my daughter and I wrote together, Mystery at Creek Academy, Where is Mrs. Quimby? She came to me when she was 6 and said she wanted to write a book. And so for 2 years we worked on this book and published it together. And for that book in particular, I relied on the reading level that you can get if you're in Microsoft Word. There is a place where you can find the reading level for your writing. And that was super helpful for this, because this is a second grade chapter book. And so we had, a very specific really wanted to nail that, because especially since I was working with her, the language could move up a little too high, and if she was writing, it might be too low. So that really helped us. And it's in like right by where you find your word count, that same little box, I think, where you click on that is where you can find the reading
Yes.
level. Is that,
I will,
yeah.
I'll share that in a second. Let me see if I can share my screen here so that everybody can see. I'll do it just a quick demo here. Share. Okay. Word. Okay, so this is, I'm just going to share with all of you a document that you'll be receiving at the end of the day today or tomorrow with the handout. And this is just the first template. But if you look here, this is the document. If you have Microsoft Word, you can click on editor, and there's a box here that you can choose if your writing is formal, if it's professional, or if it's casual. Depending on what you're writing, this is a really great way to start determining, formal. Well, let me start with casual. If you're writing memoir, in memoir, we tend to use a lot more contractions and it's a lot more informal tone so that we can relate to you as an author and as a reader. So I like to use casual. If you're writing a business document or a business book, prescriptive nonfiction, sometimes you might want to use a professional tone. So you can change those. And Microsoft Word Editor will give you recommendations on things that you might have to change. And when you scroll down to the bottom of this list, let me see here because I have all of you on my screen so I can't see. Document stats here, insights. If you click on document stats, it'll calculate your document stats and will tell you how many words there are, how many characters, and you just keep coming down here. And this is what you're interested in, this readability. And it has the Flesch reading ease percentage and the Flesch Kincaid grade level. So this document that you're going to get is at a 7.6 grade level. So it means that you definitely need to know, it's a little bit of an advanced reader, but it's not at an academic level where it might be difficult with technical terms that might be just hard to comprehend. So you always want to make sure to check that your Flesch Kincaid grade level goes hand in hand with who your target audience is. Okay, so that was just a quick thing to show. Does Scrivener let you set also your kind of like the tone of the document?
Scrivener has a lot of tools that I don't use, so I'm not sure if that does or does not have that.
Okay.
I do always end up exporting to Word for just
Yes.
for various reasons. So you
Yeah,
can check
yeah,
with
yeah,
that.
for sure. Okay, great. And Andrew, I know that you use Scrivener, so we'll check your comment on that if it gives you that option. Tanisha, do you have any special settings on any program that you
Yeah,
use?
yeah. I usually start in a Google Doc until it gets a little hefty, and then I will start to because it starts to run slow if the book gets too big, and then I'll
Hmm.
pop over into Word. Or if like I'm working on Go Pub Yourself right now, which is similar to what Catherine's talking about. Again, I'm hoping it's just simple and straightforward. The problem is I'm trying to go through every single step, so it's a big girl.
Hmm.
But
Hmm.
like that because it's got it's going to be a workbook, so it's got all these different titles and like boxes and just Google Docs just doesn't do that stuff too hot. So I will move
Yeah,
over to I do have that in Word, but yeah, usually I just I outline in a Google Doc and I'll write in a Google Doc at least until we get up to 60, 75,000 words. And then once it starts to get a little bigger, I'll move out into Word. But
word.
no special, because I just, I have my readers and my editors and stuff help me with all the language stuff. So I don't have any special
Perfect.
settings. I just do it, how I want it done. And then we refine from there, basically.
From there. Yeah. So yeah, with the help of an editor, it definitely helps refine, yeah, the language and the formatting, I think, or at least the breakdown of paragraphs. Um, I wanted to say something else about that. You were saying, so, oh yeah, about writing. This is another question that I get asked a lot. Can I write my book in Pages? Can I write it in Google Docs? And for publishers, it's a nightmare. I'm going to be very frank. Publishers will not work with Google Docs and they will not work with Pages. They will always work in a Microsoft Word document. That's going to be the last document before it goes to print and it gets uploaded to the graphic designer. They do need to have the document in Word. So it's like Tanisha said, it's great to start maybe in a different format or in Scrivener. That's what's comfortable for you. But at the end of the day, your book is going to have to be in a Word document because that's how it gets edited and that's what it gets
Well, if
used for.
you're, I
Yeah.
was gonna say if you're going traditional, right? Like I'm all indie, so it's always up to me. Like I can do whatever's
Oh,
best.
oh, can you, but
So keep
does
that in
KDP
mind.
allow for Google Docs? if
Oh,
you're
you say like the
uploading?
actual? Well, that's what I'm saying. Because at that point, everything it would have been through the book design, So we formatted everything to be uploaded. That's fair. But I'm just saying, like
Okay.
while I'm writing,
Yeah,
yes,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
exactly word, yeah. But I get
Okay.
what you're saying. Where if you're going to be asking someone else to publish it for you, do whatever they tell
Yeah, or yeah, because in my experience, like uploading to KDP or to Ingram or to Draft to Digital, they're always looking for either a Word document and I think maybe a PDF.
Well,
Yeah.
what's this child's name? KDP, right? I
Yeah,
forget. So KDP, yes, with the I think we still doing Word, and I think you can.
yeah.
I've never tried to do a PDF. I don't know.
I think it's Word. Yeah,
It's an option, you know what I mean? But I'm like, oof,
yeah,
I don't know what that would look like. But
yes.
not Scrivener, but
But it's not
anyway,
Google. Yeah, but it's not Google Docs for sure.
yeah. It's not Google Docs.
Yeah,
It's not
it's gonna have to be
Yeah.
Word.
like that wouldn't be the thing.
Definitely. Um, so if you could both go back and, or do you have any, I don't know, if you could go back and do things differently now that you've written these books in terms of target audience, I guess, is what would you do? Is there anything that you would do differently? Or is there anything that you do now? So I'll bring up, well, I'll let you both think. So here are some of the things that I do besides defining, once I kind of know who I'm writing for, here are other things that inform how I decide how I'm going to write or what my book needs to have. And one of the things that I do is that I will go to the comparable titles, the competitive titles that I have for my book. So suppose I'm writing my book Networking for Writers. I went out and I looked on Amazon what were all the other books that were done that were networking for writers that are out there. Then I looked at the ones that had reviews. There's several that don't have reviews, and I went to the ones that had reviews, and I looked at what that book description was, and then I looked at the 1-star reviews because I wanted to see those 1-star or 2-star reviews. What are people complaining about that the book didn't have that should have had? So that's an opportunity for me to put that stuff in my book if it's relevant to what I'm writing, of course.
Mm.
But at least I can take that gap of information and add that to my content. So now I know. So I check there. What are people complaining about? Sometimes people complain. It's just interesting. I really encourage you to read sometimes the 1 and 2-star reviews of your competitors
Yes.
to see what your book should have probably to not get those kind of reviews. Another thing that I like to do, I like to have long conversations with my local librarian who understands or who reads in a genre that I might be writing. So I write mostly business books and how-to books. I like to go within the craft of writing and editing. So I will ask them, who's checking out these books? Like, do people even ask questions? Like, how old are the books that you have on the shelves?
Mm.
Where do you know what books like mine are out there? Because I want to know they get exposed to so much more material than I do. And so it's really helpful for me to know what's getting moved in the library that I need to know about. And I will do the same thing with my local bookstore. You should always have a local bookstore person that you can rely on to ask questions, to get, the sneak peeks and the previews and just know what's happening because the day your book comes out, you want to have their support as well. And they're not always able to support us, but I think they do try. And so ask them again, what are people buying? I specifically do this. There's a cookbook store in Long Beach, California, that I'm very good friends with the owner, and I will email him once every 2 or 3 months and be like, "Hey, Matt, what's selling right now? What trends are you noticing? What are people asking you?" And I remember a few months ago, he said, it's really interesting because this whole like Gen Z is coming in and asking me for those church cookbooks or those community cookbooks that people would like gather recipes and put together. And they're looking for vintage things like that, like homemade vintage cookbooks.
Mm.
And I was like, huh, like, okay, I did not see that coming. But then that tells me, hey, people are interested in this. They're willing to spend money on this. Maybe I should put together a cookbook of like my local community. So things like that. Um, and then the other thing that I like to do is, what is my last thing on my list here? Um, I think, oh, look at the book clubs in your area. Or, if there's not in your area, are there any book clubs within your state or where you live that are reading books in your genre? And reach out. I like to do this on social media. I'm a lot on Instagram. So I like to ask them. I work with a book club in Mexico City. And this is a group of women that read usually nonfiction women's books. And I like to reach out to them, like, what are you reading? What did you guys like? What did you not like? What did everybody complain about? And they are very sincere and they're very honest in telling me what, they like about the books they read and what they don't like. So that kind of feedback, getting that feedback in advance before you're finished writing your manuscript is really, really helpful. Again, because you're meeting what the market is asking for or is looking to have in the books that they're out right now and that they're not getting. So those are kind of three things that I like to do. I don't know, Catherine or Tanisha, any other things that you like to do?
When it comes, oh, go ahead, Kathy.
Well, one thing I did want to mention that I have done for my own books, like while I was writing, because I was writing for people with MS and I don't have MS, I was very careful to have several beta readers who could read it and vet it and make sure that I was portraying the disease correctly, the life with that disease correctly, and all of that stuff. And I think for any fiction, it and non and actually beta readers were huge for the nonfiction book as well. Um, the first version of my book, they were like, this is so boring. And I was like, oh, okay. And then it was okay though, because I had this huge realization. I was like, oh, I just laid it out in like the most obvious way. I was like, oh, well, this very linear, logical way. It's great. And then she's like, this is terrible. And it's so boring. And this is a kitchen sink book and you should go deep, not go long, and all this stuff. And I was like, ouch, this kind of hurts. But then I had this realization. I was like, of course, I could totally organize this in a completely different way. I shuffled all of the chapters. I changed it all around and reorganized it in a way that ended up resolving problems that other beta readers had been like, this is kind of weird, and I didn't know what to do. So once I had shuffled it around and found the correct structure for the book, then now it's great. I've not one person has said, oh, this is boring, and they think it's deep, not long. It's not a kitchen sink book anymore. So it's really fascinating how much a beta reader can tell you and shape the book, and even just inspire you to think differently about it. So that happened for both of my books. That would be huge. And then on a more practical level, like what you were talking about, what's coming out, I really love on Amazon, you can search for your comparable or competitive books and then sort by date. And that will show you what's coming out in the like up to the next 6 months, so that you can see if somebody's already publishing the book that you wanted to be writing. So you can, it gives you, like you with your conversation, is loved it. Conversations are wonderful. If you don't have an in, that doesn't mean that you can't also reach this information, just
Yeah.
so it's wonderful. Yeah. So those would be my two things.
I love, and you know what I want to take away from that, because both of you, so all of us here have published two books, successfully published two books. I'm going to add it that way. Not only just self-published, but they're both published successfully, and they've opened a lot of doors for us. You'll notice that none of us are attached to our books in a way that we will not let somebody give us bad feedback or say something, that needs to improve. We are all of us. At the first time you get that feedback, you're like, oh, why? What do you mean? And then you're like, it's a business. I'm writing a book because I want it to sell. If the book is not going to sell and it's going to get cataloged like a kitchen sink book, that's not the book I'm writing. I need to change that. So you need to really leave your emotions on the side and acknowledge them, give them the moment of recognition that they need, and then push them aside and work on what does my reader want to see? Where am I missing out so that I can have a good book? So we don't take these things personally. They hurt a little bit, they sting, but the minute you're able to move on and pivot and like Catherine, like being able to use the same content, it just took rearranging it. It just took tweaking some things, and it's the same book that she wrote from the beginning. She just made it more interesting for her reader. So keep that in mind, that the feedback you're going to get from your beta readers, and don't use friends and family. Well, that's a whole other conversation. They're not your target readers most of the time. They just love you and will support you. But take that feedback with a grain of salt and think a bit of yourself as an author and a business, writer. Michael Crichton, I think he's probably got a lot of negative feedback, and he pivoted and he did what he had to do to get his stories out and to sell his books. So don't take that stuff too personally. Tanisha, and while Tanisha answers the question, I would love it if for those of you that have a manuscript in the work or think of writing a book, if you could comment in the chat what kind of book you're writing or would like to write. That way, maybe one of us can reach out to you after the session and see if you have any questions. Tell us what book it is, or what genre your book is in. That way, we can maybe provide you with more detailed information after this call. So, Tanisha,
Oh,
what's your
well,
secret
for
sauce?
me, I don't know about secret sauce. The things that I would like, or like you said, back when I first started would have liked to have, and it's not even really know it. It's like it's one of those things like you know this technically, like it makes sense logically, but really incorporating it into how you approach your writing career is a whole other beast. But my number one, of course, is that there is no such thing as perfect, right? And that a good book is going to mean something different to every person you ask because there are different
Yes.
markets and age groups and people have different experiences. It's just that's why there's so many genres and niches and all of that, right? So I think getting caught up in trying to, again, thinking my book's going to be for everybody instead of it's going to be for me first, and then I'm going to find people similar to myself who like this, and that's how I'm going to, sell the book. Because all it does is slow you down, and just for no reason, there's no upside to being just like immobilized by, oh my God, people are going to say, like you said, Linda, going to say bad things, or somebody's not going to like. Well, of course somebody's not going to like it. There's almost 10 billion people on the planet. Everybody can't like it. So I think really understanding that is so helpful. And I've gotten better in my old age, but even I haven't hit a point where I still have to talk myself off the ledge every time I get ready to publish a book. Like, Tenesha, it's all right. You did what you wanted to do. You got it out
Yeah.
there. Like, let's just go. And I think then if you understand that there's no such thing as perfect, and it just helps. I think it can help with a lot of people who struggle with things like writer's block and stuff like that and feel like they just can't write, or I mean, people will be putting down their ideas before they even start writing them. It's like, okay, slow down. Like you just, like you're beating yourself up before you even get out the door. Like just move forward. So that's the sort of stuff that I wish, and these are more, soft skills and like psychological perspective things that I wish I had I had been more comfortable with first starting out, like just accepting
Yeah.
as like truths.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree with you. I think for me, I'm a very passionate writer. I have some fiction books in the back that I've had for the last 10 years that at some point I'm going to decide to tackle. But I think for me, it's writing what I love or what I know and what comes easily, because when you write about what you know or what your lived experience is, it just flows. It's so much easier to write. So for me, it's writing what I know, writing with my heart, but writing with a plan as well. And writing with a plan means everything from, again, knowing who my target audience is, knowing what success means to me personally for this book. Because for some people, success means just having a paperback copy I can show to friends and family. For others, it means having my book up on Amazon. For others, is making the New York Times bestseller list.
Right.
So we all have different definitions of success, and the sooner you know what yours is, and by the way, I think as you start writing, your definition of success is going to start shifting, because now you're like, oh, I published it, I got a paperback, and what's next? A hardcover? Maybe I want to go traditional. And so that definition of success is going to change. Um, you really know you've made it when your family and friends actually read the whole book that you published and not just said they wanted to read it. No, I'm kidding about that. But no, so I think just being able to know who I'm writing for, being able to know what success means to me. I agree with you, Tanisha, knowing that it doesn't have to be perfect. It has to be good and to the best of my ability. And I think also knowing who are going to be the people that I'm going to have to recruit to be involved in my kind of like publishing team, whether it be the beta readers, whether it be an editor, whether it be sometimes a lot of the work that we tend to do is a manuscript evaluation for other authors just to see if the book idea is viable. So there's a lot of different stages that you can involve an editor that who works specifically on books like yours all the time, so they can give you some really clear and specific feedback as to what your manuscript might be missing. But I think if my next book project, I have I have a lot more experience now that I know what to pay attention to and what not to pay attention to, probably, and how to just get the book written, which is the most important part. Um,
And I
I'm
would
going to
say
open
that,
it. Yeah, go ahead.
well, I was gonna, because it just made me think of when you were talking about going and looking at, like the 1 and 2 star reviews. I think it was just a really key point to say, taking that feedback as far as what is relevant to yours.
Totally.
I've run into newbies who just, they act like, okay, well, whatever anybody says, I have to try to incorporate that, even though people may be telling them opposite things. And so they get
True.
really frustrated. It's like, well, okay, well, slow down. What's actually relevant to what you're trying to do? Take that feedback, but not the rest of it. Especially, and what cracks me up, because I was laughing when you were talking about looking at the 1 star and 2 star reviews. I cannot tell you how many 1 and 2 star reviews I've seen that have nothing to do with the book.
Oh,
Like just blatantly, they're like, "Oh, well, it got here a day late." I don't have anything to do with that as the author. Like, what? It just
absolutely.
tickles me. So yeah, just sift through those if you're gonna go and do that.
Totally. I had a 1 star review once on my networking for editors book, which was so, and it was someone who confused me with someone else who made a negative comment about their cat on Instagram, and so went and found me on Amazon and left a review. Linda hates my cat. Blah, blah. And it was just like,
Wow,
really?
that's
So it
wild.
does happen, and I did have I was able to write to Amazon and be like, this review is not related to the book. It's
Right.
not, I was able to complain about it, but it happens. It's that's not that's a
Totally.
true thing. So I want to open up to questions before maybe about 15 minutes of questions. Does anybody have any questions or things that you'd like to ask? This is a really great safe space to ask them, and you can just unmute yourself and ask, or raise your hand, or put it in the chat if
Chat, yep.
you're not prepared. As we think about it, I had an author reach out to me recently who is thinking about publishing. It's a mystery book, and they were very upset because they had sent their book to all these friends of theirs that were in the acting business, and they were very upset that these people had the book for 2 months and nobody had read it. And so I said, "Well, tell me about this book. Like, what did you send them?" Well, I send them a PDF. The book is about 70,000 words, and nobody's gotten back to me. And I and I was like, "Well, if you're sending them a PDF, it means they're probably going to have to be reading it on their computer. And a 70,000 word book to read on a computer is a very long book to read. We do it very often as editors, but as a reader, you want to be able to read it on a Kindle or somewhere comfortable or in a format that's easy and accessible. So sometimes, too, when we're contacting ARC readers or potential readers, it's important to know, what are we giving them? What are we asking them to do? And how can we make that easier for them to read? So keep those details in mind when you're asking people to review your books. And know also that a lot of beta readers are paid. That's a paid service that gets offered for people that read in your genre, to give you that kind of good feedback, or if you're in a good writing group that understands how to give critiques and feedback. So, um, Andrew, do you have a question that you'd like to ask?
He
Oh,
did. He
wait.
said, "Does Catherine have
Oh,
a
okay.
question
Yeah,
in the
yeah.
book?"
Yeah.
So, Catherine, Andrew has read your book and he's interested in chapter 8.
Yeah, so chapter 8 is the marketing chapter, which is, of course, like the most challenging to write because gets out of date as fast as I write it. And the book is now 5 years old, and I don't have an update yet. It's one of those things where I'm competing with myself for time. Like, do I update the nonfiction, or do I indulge my creativity and write book two of, you know, of my novel series that I'm working on? So I'm afraid I don't have an update, but I do have some good stuff on my blog if you're interested. There's usually some good information on there about, and actually, yeah, I have a recent post about like a marketing platform and thing like that that might be helpful for you. The different things that you can do. Um,
Yeah, and then book marketing, gosh, changes like by the minute, I feel. What worked,
yeah,
last year doesn't work right now. So that's something that's continuously getting updated. And then as new things come out, and new avenues or platforms, it's really hard. That's one of the problems I have with one of my books that we're republishing now at year 5, because we mentioned Twitter. We never thought back then when we published it that Twitter was not going to be called Twitter anymore.
Right.
We thought that was such a strong, stable platform and here we are, 5 years later, and it has a whole other name, and not everybody is on there anymore. So I'm having to do a revision. So that's a really good point about maybe checking to make sure your content can be as evergreen as possible when possible. That's not always possible, but
I think it helps
yeah.
to be more vague, I guess, to just talk about, like, for example, in this say, like, social media in general. So you could say something like, so on platforms where you have a character limit, do this, or on platforms that are more image based, do that. So then no matter what those platforms happen to be, they kind
yeah.
of get it, and then you don't have to keep going back and like updating it with these different names and URLs and all this sort of stuff because they got the principle, they got the key part that they need, and they can apply that to whatever pops up, as opposed to
Absolutely.
just talking about this one specific platform, and then if something happens to it, they're just lost type of situation.
Absolutely. So true. I needed Tenesha as my beta reader 5 years ago. But
yeah, for sure. Yeah. Yeah, the marketing piece is always changing, but it's good to, I do think that there are some principles that we all follow and that can be translated to any platform that you go on. I agree.
Definitely. Catherine, can you put the link to the blog maybe for Andrew there in the chat and for everyone
Sure.
else?
I think it's
actually.
Yeah, I'll find it. I'll find the specific one.
And Sharon, I believe you have a question.
I do. You in this whole thing about who you're writing for. I'm very much it's a novel, my first novel. I wrote because I wanted to write the novel. I mean, there was no target audience whatsoever. I was the target audience.
Great. Yes, yes.
And yet, in working with beta readers and definitely an editor, the question was, who is this going to? Who's going to read this? And I go, well, I'm not real sure, because I put in the chat that the novel is a historical science fiction book. So if you like science fiction, I think you'd find something interesting in it. But it's historical in the sense that the character goes through time. So there are a lot of going back in his past, and had to do a lot of research on that. So it's hard for me to even decide who I would market that to.
So this is a great question. Tenesha, can I pop in and answer? I'm going to answer it from a technical point of view, maybe. And because this is something I pay a lot of attention to since I work a lot in self-publishing, helping authors self-publish. Specifically, my son had to read a book 2 weeks ago. He needed to pick a new book that was fantasy that he needed to read. And I told him, oh, you should read 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. Because I remember reading it and it was so amazing. And and he's like, okay. And I had a copy that I had purchased that it was all illustrated. I purchased 10 years ago, and it's gorgeous, gorgeous hardcover, massive book, and tiny font, beautiful illustrations, long blocks of text that my son's, and he's 13. He saw that and he was like, why would you want me to read this? And he spent about 4 days with it and was just unhappy. And he came and he's like, can you please find a version that's more for me? And so I went to Barnes and Noble and they had a YA version. And so I was perusing it, and the chapters are much shorter. The paragraphs are much shorter. So he can, the book of course is shorter, so it's definitely a trimmed version. But it really shows you just right there in writing. It's the same information, it's the same story, but it's written a little bit differently with shorter sentences, shorter paragraphs, because it's intended for a YA reader. As adults, I would say after a certain age, people that are avid book readers, we don't have any trouble reading long monolithic. I mean, I don't mind if I'm engaged in the story, I'm great. But my husband, for the life of him, his attention is not there. It needs to be a quick book that he can get through, in a weekend. And so that for me, from a technical writing aspect, we're all very different audiences and we read differently. So the way that I would write for a 13-year-old, the same story is not how I would write it for a 50-year-old woman. So those are kind of from that, I can answer from that aspect. I don't know, Tenesha, if you have different feedback.
Well, because a lot of people don't seem to realize this. First of all, there are niches for pretty much anything you can think of. My example that I usually use is dinosaur erotica. When I found out that existed, I was like, oh, okay. We really can just do whatever we want. I got it, So this sounds like the time travel, maybe isekai stuff that I see a lot of. So I think people who read those kinds of books would love this book, if that's, so I don't think these are two diametrically opposed audiences or anything like that. There's a whole niche just for time travel science fiction, or like I said, portal fantasy. Like I said, I don't know what all the specific elements of the book are, of course, I haven't read it, but I would look in those areas.
Okay.
And just keep in mind that you don't usually, if you have something like that going on where you're like, well, it's kind of half this and half that, there's just another genre or niche for that. That's all. You know what I mean? So just go find books like that. And it's really easy to search on on Amazon as you go through. And you know how you can click on like science fiction, and then under science fiction it'll be like fantasy or technology, medicine, whatever, right? And you can just go through and keep narrowing it down until you get to books that are similar to yours, and you'll start to see it. And
Oh, I have another idea too.
Yeah.
Can I?
Sure.
I think like I would go to Google, or if you use any AI like Claude or Gemini or ChatGPT, I'd be like, "Hey, can you recommend a book to me that does this?" And I would describe your book. It's a time travel fantasy historical fiction, and see, what books do you recommend that talk about this? And it'll spit out a list of books that are out there that cover those things that you can see. Maybe your book might be like those. And then when you go to look at those on Amazon, you can read those book descriptions. And I say Amazon, but really it's any bookseller that has a legit website. Look at the book description, look at the categories. Like if you scroll down on the details page, what categories is that book listed in?
Yes.
Who are then like look at the reviews, who's reviewing it?
Right.
What are they saying about the book? Like, what did they like
pull
about it?
out
So,
a step and say, okay, what? So like you said, if you were using like chat or some other AI to ask, what are some forums? What are some websites? What are some book clubs in XYZ area that focus on this genre? And then that's how you start getting into, okay, well, here's my audience. Because again, if dinosaur erotica exists and people are buying it in droves, I promise you, whatever niche that you're writing in, there are people, large groups of people who would like to buy that book and read that book. It's just about doing this, right? Figuring out, okay, well, how do I categorize it? Number one. And then once I know what we're talking about, how do I find other people who are interested in that? When you do those two things, I think you pretty much nail it at that point.
Very good. Well, one thing I will say is anytime I've mentioned anyone, they go, "Oh, you mean like Outlander?" That's that is
totally.
immediate response from just about everybody.
Sure,
And I go, well, kind of, sort of, but
And it's always good. So I have a really good friend of mine that works at Penguin Random House. And she tells me that in the book meetings, when they get new pitches from agents and they start discussing it, they'll be like, oh, it's like Outlander meets Martha Stewart Living. And it's like, oh, so now you just totally like build in your head, what kind of book it's okay. It's like homey grown things, home cooking, but it's kind of sexy because it's got that, Outlander character, but Martha Stewart, so she's an established woman. So you can totally picture, if you can combine your book description, making it like this book meets this book, or, something like that, a mashup, it's really easy for people to identify what other books like this might be like. And even if yours is not 100% like that, but it gives them a really good idea of where your book, what category your book falls in.
And sometimes that happens in reviews as well. So like Linda was saying, go look at some of the reviews, the 5-star ones, right? It probably won't happen in the 1s and 2s, but look at the 4 and 5-star reviews, because I've had that happen to me many a time as a reader. I'm like, oh, this is so, when Harry met Sally wrapped in Desperado or whatever, you know what I mean? And so
totally.
that can give you some ideas as, okay, so here's how I can describe it to people, blah, blah, blah. So yeah.
Okay, thank you. That's both of you have been helpful. Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, so Edwin, I see your post here. Your book is titled "But Mr. Proofrock, the Mermaids Are Singing to You, Sir." Focused on 12 dreams, one inner vision experience, target audience, specifically Quakers, okay? And I would say Quakers, and this is going to seem a silly thing to say, Quakers that read books, or Quakers that are active readers. Which, right?
That makes sense.
Yeah, it's they are okay, they are focus the light, their word for God, imagery of light, the light shows up into okay, let's see. Yes, again, if you go and, ask Google or ask any of these AI platforms or ask an editor to help you, like what I would type in, what do Quakers that are looking for inner perspective books, what are they reading right now? What other books like mine are out there? It's
And
really,
who would you ask that to?
I would start with Google if you use Google. I use
Sure.
Google as a friend that I can just talk to and be like, hey, I'm looking for a book that might cover these, questions. And then what do you recommend? I also use ChatGPT a lot, but I know that not everybody is AI friendly or uses it. But there are a lot of ways of asking these, because these are kind of data driven platforms. So they're basing the answers based on data that's already out there and published. So you can just take it at face value as a research tool. again, your local bookstore, the local librarian. I would go look at websites that are selling books for Quakers. I'm sure there's tons of them because it's a niche market. And usually niche markets do really well because when you're into a specific niche and you read in that niche, you spend money on those books. So I think that's really encouraging that if you can narrow it down even more. But any other ideas, Catherine or Tanisha, for Edwin?
Oh,
I
no,
think
other than I think,
spirituality.
oh,
Yeah.
yeah,
Oh,
no, I
go.
was just gonna say basically a repeat of what we were talking about before, but just again for this specific content.
Mm-hmm.
Ask ChatGPT, do Google searches, look on Amazon, find comps, sorry, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think spirituality would be the the broad category, and then you can narrow it down. But when you're looking at comps, you can look at things that are adjacent to what you're writing. So it doesn't have to be just what's been published for Quakers, but also for other people who might have shared their stories of, visions and or dreams or something like that. Other memoirs of
Catherine,
spirituality.
we talked a lot about comps. Can you explain for those that are here in the audience that might not know what a comp is?
Sure, comps are it's short for competitive or comparable books. And I've kind of just set that into two different things, where a competitive book would be one that's hitting your same target audience. It's in a similar format. And that's really a book where if somebody came up, they'd have to choose between yours and the other person's book. That would be your competitive book. And a comparable book would be like yours, but maybe different in an important way. It could be on the same topic, but for a different audience, or same topic and audience, but a different format. So something about it is different. I also find comps where, you might say, okay, well, this is Ghost Stories of Baltimore, and I'm writing ghost stories of Nashville, and that's going to be my comp. So even though these are different target audiences, because we're thinking, visitors to Nashville versus visitors to Baltimore, you can still follow this similar format, and you can understand, that would be something. By looking at Ghost Stories of Baltimore, that if that book's sold, then Ghost Stories of Nashville will probably also sell.
Yeah, 100%. So, Edwin, I'm gonna share here something that I'll share with everyone so you can see. But I use a specific software to do my market research. I just entered Quaker spirituality books that are selling right now, the top 10, and this is the list of the 10. And I can send this to you after our call. But these are the
Thank
top
you.
10. Yeah, these are the top 10 specific books about Quaker and spirituality that come up. And it tells you basically how long they've been on the market, how many pages they have, what they're selling at, how much they make per month. So this is another tool that some editors use to get this information of our comp titles. And then you can look at each one and see what are the categories, that they're being listed in. So that'll give you a really good idea of how you need to label your book once you decide to get it out there. But yeah,
Thank you.
clearly there's a market. So
Yeah, and I
Yeah.
was gonna say there's another thing that I really kind of stumbled upon. So when I'm looking at my Amazon ads, um, if you set them up to do this, like showing me that the people that bought my book also bought X, Y, and Z book, because and the big advantage I feel like is that I know for a fact, right, that they bought both of these. So there's what I think is a comp, right, just based on like the description or whatever. But then it's like, no, they paid money for both of these books. So obviously this reader, you know what I mean, is shared between these two pieces. So I can look at that other book that they purchased and use that to inform my other marketing, advertising, all that sort of stuff. So something similar could happen even after you've published the book. I just, if you decide to do anything like Amazon ads, seeing stuff like that can be really helpful.
Yeah.
okay, everyone. Thank you so much for coming and for being here. I hope this was helpful.